Welcome back, warriors, to the worst fighting game. My divine struggle to dethrone critiCom, expect no mercy, from its lofty position at the zenith of the fighting game stink pile. Since we are starting a new chapter in this ongoing saga, I figured it would be vaguely appropriate to kick things off with a franchise that knows sagas all too well, and especially on not knowing when to finally conclude them. Isn't that right, Toriyama?
They drove a dump truck full of money up to my house. I'm not made of stone.
When we last went a few rounds with Dragon Ball Z, we did so with the much maligned Taiketsu, which is made by a Western team under great duress. But this time, we'll be taking a swing at DBZ Ultimate Battle 22, which is always in the conversation when talking about the dregs of Dragon Ball Z fighters and games in general. When originally released in 1995, a lot of children/teenagers of the future instead experienced it in 2003, which greatly contributed to, well, its horrible reputation. But is that enough to send Expect No Mercy into the next dimension? Or will we be able to judge this time capsule of a game with eyes unclouded by hate? Wait, that's a Mononoke reference. Never mind. Anyway, we won't know for sure until we get it in the ring. Ultimate Battle 22 is something of a spin-off from the Super Butoden series, and shares a lot, but not all, of the same gameplay as the previous entries, and in fact was originally called Dragon Ball Z Super Butoden PlayStation version before it got rebranded as the slightly more catchy Ultimate Battle 22. Now, everything under the classic Butoden umbrella was all developed by Tosei, who you might be familiar with, even if you don't think you are. Please allow me to explain. Now, I don't have time to count them all, but I think Tosei might have had a hand in creating every video game ever. They developed Yoshi's Cookie, The Legend of Starfree, Toxic Crusaders, the entire Bases Loaded series, Kid Icarus on the Game Boy, 2 GBA Shrek titles, Resident Evil Survivor, Resident Evil Revelations, yes, those two very different things are made by the exact same studio, and most recently co-developed Crisis Core Reunion with Square Enix, so they are nothing if not eclectic. Ultimate Battle 22 also represents the first time they worked on the PlayStation, and it certainly shows in a number of ways. A mix of 2D sprites and 3D backgrounds, and a rather big departure from how long-distance DBZ-style battles usually played out. In the older Butoden games, the screen real estate would split when fighters got too far away from each other, which was a pretty neat thing to see in 16-bit games at the time, but was then changed to whatever this was. Now, there were a number of other changes made to the presentation and gameplay, which we'll get into, but this was the big one, and Japanese Butoden fans did not like it. So, a few months later, Tosei released a definitive version, but for the Sega Saturn, and called it Shin Butoden, which we sadly never got in the West. This port used the exact same roster and sprites, brought back the old camera system, added in a much-needed story mode, as well as far more aesthetically pleasing backgrounds. Now, the PlayStation Ultimate Battle 22 did see a limited release in Europe in 1996, where it received a few fair reviews, but it was largely forgotten about soon after. Where its infamy truly lies is in its inexplicable 2003 re-release, where it finally instant transmissioned. Well, not instant, 8-year transmissioned into North American store shelves, and was again exclusive to the then very outdated PS1. Now, why did this happen? Well, because Infogrames/Atari/Funimation were most likely desperate for more Dragon Ball products in the wake of the franchise's early 2000s boom in the West. DBZ Budokai had sold gangbusters the year before, and Ultimate Battle 22 happened to be one of the last few unlocalized games for consoles that still had large active fan bases. Yeah, sorry Sega Saturn. The problem is that Atari and Funimation did the bare minimum in updating this release. 0 gameplay changes, no English voices, same ugly menus, but they still found time to add a few new errors, so this was indeed a dirty deed done very cheaply. Moreover, given that this was nearly a decade old by 2003 and the public had played the crap out of Budokai, it's no surprise that video game outlets had buried it. 1s from EGM, 20 out of 100 from the official PlayStation magazine, and a truly damning review from then GameSpot personality Ryan Davis, RIP, saying, "A really, really terrible game, and it always has been. In fact, it's so bad that a longer review would only give the game more validation, which it simply does not deserve." So let's start playing it! The opening intro of Ultimate Battle 22 is fine, serviceable even. I mean, it's no patch on the one in Final Bout, but yeah, that's the entirety of my thought. As already stated, the menus are a forgettable mishmash of styles that don't really exude DBZ, but all of that is the preamble to one of the worst character select screens I've ever seen in a long commie damn time. I mean, just look at it. I can kind of see what they're going for, but you can't just highlight the fighter in the way you'd expect. You have to cycle through each row, which is not how they appear to be grouped visually, and when you do finally find the character you want, they pop out in front of the others, obscuring them, which really isn't needed. It's a small thing, sure, but it's not the best way to kick things off. Now, each bout starts with pre-fight conversations between every character, and while they're not elaborately animated, they're still a decent way of setting the tone. Which is something I would be saying to you if I was reviewing the 1995 Japanese original version. Since Funimation and Infogrames had no interest in spending any additional money, instead of localizing these convos with voice or even just text, they chopped them out of the game completely. Nice! And now we have the actual game, and they certainly went for a specific look here. The sprites do appear as if they were lifted straight from the show, or more accurately, a degraded VHS tape recorded off an early 90s TV broadcast of the show. Now, I respect using hardware to achieve a radical new visual identity, but I don't think it worked out here. I'd much rather have more dynamic and detailed original sprites rather than trying to replicate a super low-res facsimile of the source material. You stack this up against, say, Hyperdimension, and I'll pick the latter every time. Animation is also similarly limited here, as it's a well-known fact that the PlayStation wasn't the most ideal machine for 2D fighting games, as evidenced by a bunch of frames being cut out of several Capcom and SNK titles. So what that means is that this winds up giving the entire roster this stiff, basic look, but honestly, this stuff looks like Third Strike when compared to the backgrounds. For whatever reason, Tosei went with 3D here, a choice so baffling that it renders me speechless. Out of like the 20 or whatever episodes I've done, I honestly feel these are the worst stage backgrounds that my poor eyes have ever been subjected to. I mean, Fight for Life was somehow less egregious, and that's partially because DBZ locales are iconic. You know what they're supposed to look like, and these barely resemble them. What's intended to be a vast canyon environment looks like you're fighting on a moldy block of cheese, and the hyperbolic time chamber doesn't even seem to be finished. Look at it. It's just a gray, untextured void. Like, I know that's what the stage is supposed to kind of be, but this is just lazy. What's fortunately not lazy is the roster, which is as good as you could hope for in 1995, although it's a little lacking for 2003, and it has its own particularities. In my opinion, including Goten, Kid Trunks, and Gotenks all as separate characters is a little superfluous, but what's worse is no Yamcha! Come on, how am I supposed to make a Crater reference now? yeah, here's a raw one anyway. Another slightly smaller knock against the presentation is the lack of any win screen. The characters barely animate once the match is over, none of them say anything, and it doesn't even display like Piccolo wins or something. It just fades out almost immediately. Also, not exclusive to this game, but the UI is repeatedly ruined by all the TMs and Rs on each and every character name. That stuff just always brings me one step closer to the edge. The weirdness with the roster doesn't stop there. Infogrames was in such a hurry to get this out the door that they slapped Kid Buu and Mystic Gohan on the North American cover, despite neither appearing in any version of the game, which is the most Infogrames thing ever. Imagine if Capcom put Maki on the cover of Street Fighter V, but never included her in-game in any form. I would send a strongly worded tweet. Now, if you are one of the 3 people who hasn't figured it out yet, the 22 in Ultimate Battle 22 represents the playable cast, except that's a massive lie. There's actually 27 characters, as you can unlock an additional 5, which really makes that title screen... Oh, that's kind of cool, actually. You know what's less cool, though? One of those unlockables. Yeah, there's Roshi, Mr. Kid Goku, and Super Saiyan 3 Goku, that's all fine. The issue is with the last one, Gogeta, Vegito, or do I? Apparently, but I'm not sure how accurate this is, since Funimation hadn't yet dubbed Movie 12 at that point, they didn't want to spoil this fusion for Western fans, so they just renamed him Vegito, while in the Japanese version, he's Gogeta. Now, you'd think that would be that, but no, the dragon hole goes even deeper. Once you unlock these characters, you get an additional intro animation that shows Vegeta and Goku using the Potara earrings to transform, not the fusion dance, so both versions have it wrong. And lastly, this character, whoever he is, can perform one of Vegito's signature moves. What the hell? I mean, Hitful! Ultimate Battle 22 is a 6-button game. Kinda. You have buttons for punching, kicking, flying, and a dedicated one for projectiles. The other 2 mystery buttons let you dash forward and backwards, which I admit is handy and lets you zip around the screen pretty effortlessly. You also have throws, the ability to deflect projectiles, put up energy shields, meteor attacks, and each character has their own unique special moves, so there's certainly some stuff here, far more than what was in Taiketsu, for example. While the stiff animation and lack of combos is an issue, really it's the flying that drags the experience down. Tosei replaced the snappy camera system from the prior Butodens and decided things would look better like this, which they absolutely do not. Maybe the PlayStation couldn't handle what the Super Nintendo could do, I don't know, but regardless, this is what they chose, and as mentioned, they ran that shit back for the later Saturn port. Moving on, like many other DBZ games, using key attacks drains your meter, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but I've resigned to accept it, as it's a series trope. So while nothing within the gameplay is amazing or anything you haven't seen before, it's nowhere near the worst, and I'd say Taiketsu easily outshitties it. So let's wrap up with the modes, cause there's not much to say. There's Versus, a tournament battle that's actually a tournament battle, and the weird build-up stuff. This lets you level up whatever character you want, which increases their health and damage, and that's it. You don't get new moves or attacks, you can just fight as a slightly more powerful version of yourself. As stated earlier, if you want a proper story mode, go for Shin Butoden, not this, because Ultimate Battle barely even has an arcade mode. There's only Versus CPU, which forces you to fight all 22 characters in a row before you can see your chosen Z fighter's ending. Now let's talk about those endings, shall we? Oh wait, there aren't any. After all this wonky shit in the presentation and modes, it's somewhat of a relief that Ultimate Battle 22 handles mercifully okay. The floaty jumps, rigid animation, and how clunky the flying mechanics feel are all obviously negatives, but they hardly make it worse fighting game material. The dashing is responsive, and most of the special moves and supers have a good amount of impact. It's just that the other stuff in the game surrounding it brings it all down into a stinky bio-Broly-esque sludge. But when considering all these factors, where does that ultimately put Ultimate Battle 22? Will the Z-Fighters be able to defeat the evil and incompetent Expect No Mercy? When will I dispense with this overused DBZ trope? Well, right now. Cue the transition. This is one of those very rare cases where presentation is paramount. Dragon Ball is, let's not kid ourselves, a legendary franchise. So despite a solid roster, seeing the rest of the game being riddled with so many mistakes, omissions, and cut corners is a massive letdown. The horribly realized backgrounds, threadbare content, and lack of care are all evidence to that. And again, the Saturn version fixed a number of these issues, so it invalidates this PlayStation Edition's existence. If Funimation and Infogrames had just left Sleeping Saiyans lie, then Ultimate Battle would have gone relatively unnoticed, but they just had to take out that Dragon radar to find something they could hawk to the starved fanbase. So even with all that said, we do need to place this in our tier list of trash, and since I morally, and I don't even think legally, can rate this lower than Taiketsu, it'll just have to settle for the ever-crowded, fairly stinky gulag. And with that, I think we've expectedly extinguished another one of Expect No Mercy's enemies. And if you out there would like to nominate any other possible contenders to its crown of crap, do let me know in the comments below or sound the battle gong over on my Twitter. Until then, I'll see you next time on the worst fighting game.